For years, people got excited about new iPhones. Every new iPhone generation meant something genuinely new. But then Apple changed that by intentionally crippling their own products to maximize profit margins. This is the history of the most disappointing iPhone generation ever made. For 15 years, iPhone releases followed a rhythm. Every year, a new chip. The A-series processor got faster, more efficient, more capable. Sometimes the improvements were revolutionary, but sometimes they were incremental with slightly better cameras or marginally longer batteries. But you could always say a new iPhone was objectively better than the one before it. But that changed in 2022 with the iPhone 14 generation. The iPhone 14 keynote was called Far Out, which is ironic because nothing about the standard iPhone 14 was far out, because almost nothing was new at all. But anyway, Tim Cook says this is the best iPhone we've ever made. The specs appear on screen, and immediately something is wrong. The iPhone 14 had an A15 chip, which was the same as the iPhone 13 the previous year. For the first time in the modern era, Apple released a new iPhone with the previous generation's chip. In every single year prior, Apple had unveiled a new chip generation alongside a new iPhone generation. The A-series chip was the heartbeat of every new iPhone announcement. The number went up, the performance and efficiency went up year on year without fail. But the iPhone 14 broke that streak. Apple's defense was that the A15 Bionic in the iPhone 14 had an extra GPU core compared to the 13's version. Whether that justifies the $799, that's up to you. But since the chip was basically the same, surely the phone would look different, right? But no, it wasn't. Because the iPhone 14 looked literally identical to the iPhone 13. The same dimensions, an identical notch, an identical camera bump. If you put an iPhone 13 and iPhone 14 side by side, you literally cannot tell them apart without turning them on. The only real differences were the slightly better camera processing, the emergency SOS and crash detection. Emergency SOS via satellite allowed iPhone 14 users in remote areas, places with no cellular signal, no Wi-Fi, no infrastructure, to send an emergency message to first responders via satellite connection. Whereas crash detection used the accelerometer and gyroscope to identify if you'd been in a serious car accident and automatically call emergency services if you were unresponsive. These were good features, but that was it. And people asked the questions, why would anyone upgrade from a 13? But Apple didn't have a good answer, because there wasn't one. It was essentially the same phone being sold twice. But what's funny is that the base iPhone 14 wasn't the biggest disaster. That honor goes to the iPhone 14 Plus. Apple had a gap in their lineup. People who wanted a large iPhone screen for years were forced to buy the most expensive Pro Max model, because that was the only way to get a big display. But Apple's solution was the Plus, which was a large-screened version of the standard iPhone 14. The iPhone 14 Plus had a 6.7-inch display, which was the same as the Pro Max. On paper, this made sense, but in practice, it became one of the worst-selling iPhones in years. For 2 years, Apple sold the iPhone Mini, a smaller phone, which also sold poorly, but Apple's response was to discontinue it and replace it with the exact opposite. And unlike every other iPhone 14 model, the Plus didn't launch in September. It launched October 7, 2022, which was 3 weeks later. The delay killed any hope it had. Reviews for the iPhone 14 Pro were already out, and people had already decided what to buy. Within weeks of launch, supply chain analysts were reporting that Apple had slashed production orders for the iPhone 14 Plus more dramatically than any other model in the lineup. Some estimates suggested demand was running at less than half of what Apple had projected. Reports indicated it accounted for a tiny fraction of total iPhone 14 sales during the launch window. Why did it struggle? Because the iPhone 14 Plus cost $899. For $100 more than the Plus, you got the Pro, with a new chip, better cameras, and a new feature. It was a product priced in no man's land. Unlike the Mini, Apple didn't kill the Plus immediately. They kept selling it, but it became known as the wait-for-a-sale phone. It wasn't until the iPhone 15 and 16 that the Plus model gained better features to actually justify its existence. But the 14 Plus, it remains a warning sign of what happens when you get the pricing wrong. While the base models disappointed, the iPhone 14 Pro was genuinely impressive. The new feature Dynamic Island replaced the notch with a pill-shaped cutout that became interactive. Notifications, music controls, timers, all integrated into the cutout with smooth animations. The new A16 chip was faster and more efficient, which was what people expected from a new iPhone. The camera improved from 12 megapixels to 48 megapixels for the first time in iPhone history, and the always-on display made it so the screen could stay on at low brightness, showing time, widgets, and notifications without fully waking. It sounds great, but not compared to what came before. The 13 Pro was exceptional. The ProMotion display, the great cameras, and an A15 Bionic that was fast enough for everything. The iPhone 14 Pro was improved, but the improvements weren't as dramatic as Apple's marketing suggested. Dynamic Island was cool, but didn't change how you used the phone. The A16 was faster, but the A15 was already fast enough, and you wouldn't notice the difference in daily use. And the reviews showed that. The iPhone 13 Pro had a 4.6 out of 5 stars, whilst the 14 Pro had a 4.4 out of 5 stars. The iPhone 14 Pro was better on paper, but reviewers were slightly less enthusiastic. This is because the iPhone 13 Pro had exceeded expectations, and the 14 Pro only met those expectations. But as good as the 14 Pro seemed, it also had a slight issue. By mid-2023, reports emerged of iPhone 14 Pro models experiencing rapid battery degradation. Users reported battery health dropping to 85 to 90% within 6 to 8 months, which was far faster than previous models. Apple never officially addressed this, but the complaints were widespread enough to suggest a real issue. The 13 Pro's battery held up better over time, whilst the 14 Pro's didn't. The iPhone 14 Pro was good, but it wasn't great enough to justify the disappointment of the base models. If Apple had made the base iPhone 14 genuinely good, the Pro would have felt like a luxury upgrade. Instead, the Pro felt like the only option, and that was the problem. Looking at the iPhone 14 lineup, it was clear that the gap between Pro and non-Pro had never been wider. And this wasn't by accident either. Apple essentially forced customers to buy the Pro models. Because for years, Apple's base iPhone and Pro iPhone had a reasonable relationship. The Pro had better cameras and more features, but the base model still got the new chip. It still felt current and still felt like Apple cared about the people who couldn't spend $1,000 on a phone. The iPhone 14 broke that relationship. Apple's thinking was, if we make the base model disappointing, people will feel like they have to upgrade to Pro. And psychologically, it worked, because the base iPhone 14 was $799 with last year's chip and a similar design. But the 14 Pro was $999 with all these new things. The $200 gap felt worth it because the base model felt weak. If the iPhone 14 had the A16 chip and a new design, you might think the base model is fine and I don't need Pro features. But because the iPhone 14 feels like a downgrade from what you expected, suddenly $999 seems reasonable. And by implementing a middle ground with the Plus at $899, that made the Pro seem like a better value. But people saw right through what Apple were doing. There were countless threads about how the iPhone 14 was a disappointment. The next iPhone generations, the 15 and 16, both had improvements to the base model. The base iPhone 15 had previously Pro-exclusive features, which were Dynamic Island and the 48MP camera. It also had the same A16 chip. The base iPhone 16 had the Pro-exclusive Action button and the new A18 chip. This is what the iPhone 14 should have been: better features and meaningful improvements. They were phones that didn't feel like a punishment for not buying Pro. The gap between Pro and non-Pro was still there, but it was narrower than the iPhone 14 generation. Apple will probably never make a base model as disappointing as the iPhone 14 because they learned that was too far. But it also showed that Apple was willing to sell you the same thing you may have bought last year. The phones weren't necessarily bad, but they didn't justify an upgrade. It showed how Apple would rather manipulate you into buying Pro than make the base model great. A company that asks how little can we give them before they complain instead of how much can we give them to delight them. The iPhone 14 wasn't a failure because it sold millions of units and made a lot of money. But it was a disappointment, because failure means you tried and fell short. Disappointment means you didn't try hard enough. And Apple really didn't try. They just counted the money.